So good morning, good afternoon or good evening if you are somewhere in the world. You might have heard my patter a few times now, but we do have a global audience for this one. So this is probably UK, Europe, most of the East, all the way around to Australia. So welcome. Haven't quite got the US on board yet. I think it's about sort of 3 o'clock in the morning for them. But great to see everybody back. We have a really interesting session this morning with a great speaker, a really experienced finance leader. And just to explain the title, The Shift Live, we run a feature on Generation CFO really to promote great leadership, and it's called The Shift. And it's normally a written form, but this is going to be a live interview, a chat, and we're going to use the same sort of structure as those written interviews. So that's the reason behind the name. So just a reminder as well, we are Gen CFO. We're really proud to be putting on this summit with an awful lot of great innovators, people who are bringing in thought leadership, who are trying to bring different points of view, challenge the status quo, people who are thinking differently in the profession. And sometimes it's quite difficult to get on board with some of these ideas. But all we want to do here is spark ideas, to start people thinking differently. I think it's the thinking that's sometimes the hardest part. So you're very welcome, and hopefully you can get on board with a lot of the messages that have come out of day one and day two today. So some housekeeping on the session. So we will be recording this session. This will be live on the platform. We will also encourage you to ask questions as well. This is a chat between leaders, and if you have any questions that you want to bring in, then please do use the chat functionality or the Q&A functionality. If we don't answer those questions, we will try to answer them on the community platform as well. And if you are looking for your attendance certificates for CPD, then you can download that via the summit group on the platform. So if you register for the platform, you'll see a link to that within the group platform. So that's it. So I would like to introduce you to Selina Butterfield-Mashoofi, who is someone who does very similar things to me on the community side, but first and foremost is a great finance leader, transformational leader, and worked for some amazing brands. Great to have you here, Selina.
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone who's kindly joined today or is looking back on view later. Thank you.
Exactly. And it was quite a long day yesterday, so credit to anyone who is showing up today, and we will keep you on your toes the whole day because we've got some great content coming. Now like I said, we're going to structure this in the normal interview style, so I'm almost going to play journalist on this one. So the first question is, looking back, could you give like a brief overview of your career and maybe how that's changed a little bit recently and what the future is looking like?
Yes, absolutely. So I am PwC trained before going into industry, but if I take it back a little bit further, I really think about mindset. And for me, that came firstly from my father running a toy company where we did everything from patent applications to selling to driving the forklift for outbound logistics. And that gave me a real roll-up sleeves, multi-hat wearing perspective. And secondly, competitive sport, which I did across my teen years, and that gave purpose and resilience. So playing those back into career side of things, after ACA qualifying, I spent a couple of years at a fast growth construction company before joining Amazon in soft lines, firstly in FP&A and then in fashion buying. And then I moved across to Burberry in their group FP&A team and then their beauty team. I then continued the interest in retail at Cath Kidston, where I was acting CFO, before moving it across to Very as FD of planning, performance and capability, and then a group FD role. But this year I've pushed perspective and I've complemented the contrast of bigger business with more legacy by spending time with startups in a fractional CFO capacity. So I've had a really interesting learning journey over the last few months.
Can I just come in with a question on this? Because I think there's a story in there in the early career, right? So you seem to be in this sort of competitive, construction, feels a bit male environment. And then was there a response to that? Because you seem to go fashion, retail, beauty, what happened there? Did you consciously move away from that kind of, construction environment, maybe a more male environment?
So a slightly different perspective, actually. It came from complacency. I've got one of these knee jerks that if I feel people are boxing you to go and do something, I tend to try and do the absolute opposite of what someone's directing me to do. So coming out of qualifying, I had more predictable choices. So I had an investment bank to go to, I had an FMCG fast track program, whereas the left card option was to go to this construction company. And I thought, hang on a minute, this feels like a real practice what you preach. If you can go and talk to 300 hard hat wearing builders about revenue recognition, then you're earning your stripes as an accountant. But what happened after being there for a year was the credit crisis hit, and we went from being quite a fast business to one which was far slower. And I've definitely recognized from the time with my dad with the toy company that I enjoy the fast pace and I enjoy the customer interaction. So that's really what's driven the path more recently of customer-centric organizations, or organizations on a journey to customer centricity, but where you've got that real feel of delivering product to customers.
Yeah, and there's such different environments, aren't they? Like I early on was in investment banking and then moved into retail, and they're so different in terms of proximity to the product and proximity to the customer. And, I loved being in banking for a short while because the numbers were so big,
Yeah,
but that quickly fades away. And it's like, no, what's the latest product? And being at John Lewis, it was all about the Christmas ad. So what about today? Where's the career now and the future?
Future will be an interesting one. Watch this space. But if I take it from an areas of interest perspective, so I care deeply about building environments where people can bring their whole self to work. So cultures of high performance and shared purpose. So I put attention on the intention of horizontals, building deep finance capability. This is often coupled with transformation across all areas of transformation, org design, ERP implementations, tech stack updates, digitalization. So really enjoy those fast-paced environments on that path to customer centricity. And culture means everything to me. So I focus on clan environments, which are relationship-led. And more recently this year, I've been focused on social consciousness. So spending time on B Corp certification and a 360 accountability to an organization's contribution to community. So where next is somewhere that'll tickle each of those areas of interest. We'll put that through the algorithm and see what spits out the other side. Maybe I'll ask ChatGPT.
Well, yeah, soon enough. So that's interesting. You mentioned the sort of the fast pace of the environment that you like to work in. I think transformation is very much that. There also seems to be a bit of crossover there with, maybe your roots in that shop or in smaller business, because I don't know how you feel about transformation, but it sometimes feels like a startup within an enterprise. You're trying to make change, set things up, build a new team. Is there something in that you recognize and the reason why you went into transformation and that pace?
I definitely like the journey that's involved, and I think that's where transformations often appealed. I also like scratching the itch of something that hasn't been achieved before, and it's not necessarily obvious from the outset how to get to it. And I think that probably came from sports, where you would look years ahead. And for me, I wanted to be in the Olympics. And, as a 10-year-old girl, that wasn't an achievable mountain, and breaking that down into achievable chunks. And I really apply that to a career. So I'm quite unfazed. I've had all sorts of things of systems go down with malware attacks, and I'm quite unflappable in that situation and very practical and logical about what to do next. And that definitely helps the transformation. I'd also say the people side of things couldn't be underestimated. And that really is the success or failure in transformation. And particularly the work I did in capability at Very, and this appreciation of what works across rather than just being focused on moving up and your next promotion, that's really helped as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Actually, we had a mastermind on Tuesday with some of our exec members, and that came through loud and clear, where, you know, we kind of looked at what transformation is. We dig into digital transformation on these masterminds, and, you know, everyone basically said, look, you know, stop talking about tech when it comes to transformation, focus on outcomes and people. That's really the hard bit, you know, that's really the bit that needs to change. So yeah, you're definitely not alone. You know, in terms of sort of changes and interventions that you've, you know, been able to initiate in a great career so far in some great companies, I'm sure it'll continue. You know, what have you been able to transform and change? Because I see those as different.
I'll come at it with the classic of acronyms to remember. So we'll go for it from the 3 C's perspective. So complacency, compromise, and care. So kicking off with complacency, I keep that as a real watch out, and that's from 2 perspectives. So one is yourself. So I think finance leaders are in such a strong position currently. Obviously that's layered with a huge stack of bias, but I think there's few backgrounds that I would favour being in the marketplace currently. So I really do think you can do anything, and you should. That doesn't mean ascending the corporate ladder is right for all. I fully support the idea of branches to a career and a tree and lateral steps. But this self-aware focus of how you're growing and developing is really important. And so for me, that meant going into the construction company as the first move, or going into FP&A, going into buying, after FP&A and Amazon, and just laterally moving into something different rather than being complacent in something a little bit more predictable. The other side in complacency is from those around you. So I mentioned earlier about people putting you into a box, and there's plenty to read on how you're still perceived on the first impression that you make in an organisation. So you might have been there for 10 years, but there's a deep-rooted memory of that time that you couldn't find the printer on day one. So it can take some real onion unpeeling to reveal that perspective. But what it means is your manager and recruiters could well be boxing your direction of travel. So I think there's a real personal agency here in both rebasing the perspective and also understanding that delta in how others see you towards how you see yourself. So for me, an example would be after having children. I've got 3, and often well-intended, there were perspectives that said to me, oh, you'll want this type of role, or you'll want to move in this direction after children. And I needed to intervene and have both the thinking time, but also the conversations that said, this is where I want to go next. So that's complacency. The second one is compromise. So this is an interesting one that's come out of personal growth and learning as well for me. And we've all got different interpretations of what compromise is. But for me, I call it where you've gone against your gut or your inner voice. So with the learning, what I've now established is compromise, or that move away from inner voice, tends to mean that there's a difficult conversation that you're swaying away from. And instead, you've got a real capability that you need to lean into and develop to support that conversation. So using an example for me, that could mean getting clear on remit in a role. It could mean saying no to a job offer, which I wouldn't have done earlier in my career, or being the one voice in the room that asks the question, or making those go, no-go decisions in the 11th hour. So that's a really important one on compromise. Final area then on interventions is care. And this one's taken me a long time to come around to, but come out of this personal work over the years. So the old me would have said, harder you work, the result is earned and it's justified. But now, thanks to having a wonderful coach, I've established that I've got a pattern that I love work, I lean in hard, and every few months a red light goes off and I need to have a bit of a care rest, take some time out and reset and go again. So I'm working really hard on it to get to this triangle of work, family and care, which care for me is staying fit, not burning the midnight oil for work, but it's a work in progress, right? I don't have the secret sauce that makes it work. Sometimes I'm winning and sometimes I'm learning. But on the learning front, I'd say probably it's those little victories. And I was sharing with Sophie the other day, a 5-minute meditation rather than the 1 hour, and those little goals that take you in the right direction rather than the big leaps that are perhaps unattainable. So a slightly different angle to it, but those are where I've intervened over the years.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And, you know, it's amazing that you sort of, you know, created your own model of working, really. I think that'd be really helpful to other people. And, you know, I love the sort of the golden thread in there is sort of this continuous development. You know, this isn't just about how you can change an organization, but it's how you can evolve and how you can transform yourself. There's a lot of self-development in there by the sounds of it as a leader, which, you know, I don't know whether we always prioritize. And obviously it's Mental Health Awareness Month this month. We're supporting the Mental Health Foundation through this summit. I think we've raised over £1,000 for them. And, you know, they would say, you know, you don't sort of let your laptop run down when you're going on a business trip. You know, you actually make sure it's charged, and you look after your laptop and your battery, and, you know, make sure that you can, you know, have your energy at the right points on that journey. And I think that's kind of what we need to be doing for ourselves as well. I love that. I love that. I just want to dig in a little bit on the personal brand, and maybe how, you know, you can change perceptions of yourself and your team in enterprise, because a lot of the conversation yesterday was kind of saying, you know, if things are going to change for accounting and finance leaders, we do need to go out into the business and you know, almost do a PR sort of exercise to say, look, we're not bean counters, we're strategic business partners. You know, we're not stuck in spreadsheets, we're analytics translators. You know, we're not in the library, we're storytellers, right? And that involves, I think, a leader getting out there and developing their brand. Can you tell us just a bit more about that sort of personal brand development?
Yeah, so I would say it starts first with the plaster rip-off and the harsh truth of where do you stand today? And that's probably the biggest step foremost, because the journey and the shiny light of what we're all walking towards is all very lovely, but we often don't start with that mirror of today. So I would call it the harsh truth, or call it same page thinking. But I think in brand, and also any development that you're doing for your team, is to sit there and go out and pick a very broad group or broad base of individuals around the organization and just say, okay, pick some words. How would you describe me today? Or how would you describe the finance function? And then turn that into a kinetic. And to achieve what we would like to achieve in 12 months' time, what would that look like? And very active words. So it's a very positive journey, but I think that's very important. What you tend to find, and particularly with hybrid at the moment, is people can spend a lot of time behind computers coming up with these wonderful ideas of where they're going, but they haven't checked in with those around them. And back to that idea of collaboration, people, culture, making it all work. Unless you've navigated it against the context, your chances of successful outcome are far, far lower.
Yeah, there's been a lot of great ideas that have gone nowhere, right? I think that's well documented in the startup space. Really interesting. I'm just going to bring in a question here and just remind everyone, if you do have questions as we go through, I will ask them and bring them in at an appropriate point. And do chat amongst yourselves. I can see that there's a few people agreeing with what you're saying, you know, sometimes winning, sometimes in learning mode. Great perspective from David there. We've got a question from Zoe sort of saying, at what point does transformation become a new way of working that is embedded rather than something that is done to the business, right? That's a big question and $1 million question. It's like, yes, you can take something to the business, but, you know, how do you work on adoption? How do you work on true transformation and change?
I did a lovely talk earlier this year on transformation, and butchered the English language by bringing in the word embeddedness, because it really was the multifaceted layering that made transformation successful. So walking the talk and embedding that into culture, your practices, your meetings, your ceremonies. So it couldn't just be the portfolio, the pitch deck. It couldn't just be the group of 30 people that formed the leadership team. It had to be intrinsically embedded, and it took time, and it certainly wasn't static. What's often forgotten is people spend so much time in transformation going, okay, well, which of the 3 ideas are we going to sign off? But then by the time you've done your 2-year journey and look back, it probably looks quite different to what you signed off in the beginning. The organization's grown, the people have changed. So those practices and multifaceted layering to make it work. I think it was Gartner, they did a piece of work that you needed 6 methodologies to really embed it. And one would be the meetings. So if you start thinking how intrinsic it is to have 6 different items to embed transformation, it's vast, it's vast. I don't think anyone ever turned around and said, I underscaled how big transformation was. So if you start with that lead foot of just go bigger, think bigger, you're probably in the right mindset for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people, they struggle to get sign off. And this, we're talking budget here, this is pounds and pence. They struggle to get sign off for the change management side, for the people side. It's for some reason, it seems to be so much easier in transformation to get a license, a bit of kit, a tool, someone to work on processes. Thing. Yeah, it's all very tangible. But the change management side of things, at the same time, though, everyone's saying it's the people, it's understanding the direction and the outcomes. So, how that sounds like a big challenge. How can we make sure that we are focusing on that as much as everything else? Because I think even the technology companies will say, look, we've probably done this 50 times before. We know we can land this. It's just your embeddedness KPI that you need to work on. I'm going to take that if you don't mind.
Hashtag. One, I think there's a real role for finance professionals knowing what we know, in rather than being the person that's signing off the license, is calling it early and doing are we going big enough? Are we thinking about everything early enough? I've certainly been on that journey with a provider before where we've spoken about lighting, and then it's the week before we're about to start on the project, and then they start saying, have you thought about change management? So everyone needs to get off the sort of the naughty thinking of making the number small as possible to get the journey going, and size it and scale it early, because the implications are huge, for length of project. Have you got the right talent? How are you going to capability build it? What's your culture going to look like at the end of it? Because you're wanting your people to go on the journey too, for them to be part of the change. You've got to talk what the transformation actually looks like right from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you've worked in different organizations. I'm sure they approached it differently. I've worked in 2 companies that approached it completely differently. Amazon was just do it. There's an F word in the middle, but it's literally... I
was just going to add that for you. We're both very Amazonian.
Yeah. It's anything's possible, and it will be done in half the time that all the consultants tell you it's going to take, right? Very ambitious, and it's an amazing environment to work in. The other approach to that was, the John Lewis approach, which actually, because of their partnership structure, had a huge focus on change management, not because of the program, but because of the inherent kind of support, the council support that they call it, within the organization. So if you did want to make a change to anything, you kind of had to make sure that the council was happy with it. So, but the goal was, maybe not, it's structured from a transformation point of view, but the goal was the same: take the people with you, make sure the people are happy with the transformation. And obviously there's a cost associated to that, but there's also a better time to value with that as well. So, what do you want? Do you just want the airs and graces of putting the technology in, or do you actually want the benefit of the people using that technology?
There's
How
probably
was
a few
your
layers.
experience then?
Yeah, there's probably a few layers to it. One, I would say, look for a provider where you've got a culture compatibility. Because if you're jarring the two examples that you've shared there of the just put it in and work with it versus bring the people with you, if your provider's on a different end of the scale, that's going to make things very, very difficult. So I think that check-in's very important. Second, I would say it probably plays really to high performance teams full stop and what your capability within your people looks like. That if everyone gets a vote, you can get transformation inertia. So you need the perspective that people are built into the outcome and the purpose of the transformation, but you've got accountability and decision making at the right level so that you're able to progress. So people are bought into the change, but it's not waiting for a blessing from someone on high for every single decision as it goes. So there's a definite push and a pull, which is where I think the playback to these mechanisms of successful transformation, that unless you've got the capability in your rituals, your practices, your way of working, that you're able to escalate some of these decisions, and where things have gone wrong, where the course correct's needed, you could very quickly veer off track as well.
Yeah, and I can almost see like this definition of this embeddedness KPI coming through, right? It's like,
Let me know when you've worked it out.
I think it's a really interesting approach, though, because we do it in business, right? In sort of a sales pipeline. We would look at how many meetings there were taking place, how many leads were generated from the meetings, what the percentage chance of that pipeline converting. It's a similar sort of conversation, right? We're saying, of the people who are changing, how many meetings have you had with them? What was the response? What's the probability of change? I'm kind of creating the metric as we go, right?
Yeah, have your KPIs changed? Has your culture changed? What it's moving through from and to? Then you've got your mapping of the project itself. Is that on track? Is it not? So yes, I think by the end of the day, we can have something set up.
Excellent. And I'm going to bring in a guy who's working on this at the moment. Actually, I just remembered Andrew Codd, who you might know him from the Strength in the Numbers podcast. He's actually working on this at the moment with trying to sort of bring it into an app, which is it's quite interesting. So yeah, maybe we can get together on the community and try and crack the embeddedness KPI. Anyway, lots of conversation about transformation and change, and obviously the whole summit is about that. So I want to just change things back to Selina, and just ask a little bit about you as a leader and what motivates you. And you pulled out a few sort of things already about sport and Olympics and your drive and early influences, but what really motivates you personally to go for the roles that you're going for?
So it's taken a long time to really sit in the authority of it, but I feel a real personal agency currently, very much presently. So in the driving seat of my career, which feels great. It feels fantastic. It feels earned, it feels hard work, but it feels good. And I'm very conscious of an ever developing toolkit on how to best collaborate with others. I certainly don't sit there thinking I've got all the answers. It's a journey. So I'm really, really grateful for the path that I currently walk. I don't take it for granted, and I recognize the nourishment it needs. So days like today, a plug for Gen CFO. So it's a fantastic network. You need to be involved to get more out. So a nudge for those questions, whether people are thinking about it now or afterwards, come to the events, engage and nourish and feed back in. And the paths that you can end up getting taken on, they're very different to those that you sat. I mean, for me, back at Christmas, I hadn't heard of portfolio careers. By February, I was in one. And it just, unless you're engaging and having the conversations and following those threads, you don't get to live as fully in my perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you for the plug. I didn't know you were going to say that. I appreciate it. I think communities generally are great for leaders, great for emerging leaders, people who aspire as well. And you know, there are some hard facts out there, right? You know, a lot of jobs are invisible, and you know, the more senior you get, the chances are they'll come from your network or your community, you know, rather than a recruitment company. You know, there's things like that. I also think there's a lot of softer side to it, which is, you know, certain things that you can't talk to your colleagues about. There's certain things that you can't talk to your family about because they'll just, you know, blank you and oh, it's work, I don't want to know. So those third spaces, the communities, I think are really important. And I know you're involved, you know, in another one as well. I don't know whether you want to say something about that. I appreciate the plug for Gen CFO, but
is there a return plug opportunity?
There are other opportunities out there, right? I'm a community builder, and it would be, you know, stupid of me to say, well, there's only one, you know.
Yes, I would definitely echo that there's not a one size fits all. And I think at different pages in your book, you want to engage with different communities in different ways. So the overarching title is, if you don't engage, you don't get anything out. So regardless of which ones you're involved, be present, be there. And whether it's for you or somebody else, you'll need different things at different times. The other network that I'm involved with is called Nova. If anyone is interested in having more of a chat, do reach out. That one was built out of the thinking that women often in boardrooms can be looking at multiple male counterparts around the room and find it that much harder to ask some of those difficult, more personal questions, or have that black book of people to call on. So that's where Nova came about. It's grown very quickly over the last 3 months. There's no agenda, much like here, paired back conversations, like minds. You'll get on with some people, you won't get on with others. But I'd really encourage people, if you haven't yet in your career reached out, engaged, find a community that works for you. Find yourself that other triangle edge, that square edge, that part that you're able to reflect on where you're at, outside of where you fit in your organization or where you fit in your family network. It's incredibly important.
And, you know, just to finish the community chat, because I could go on about this all week. Do you feel that there's a growing need for this post-pandemic? Because it seems like, you know, people are working remotely now. We've had conversations about trying to get the balance right with flexibility and remote working, but it is there to stay in some form. So do you feel that because of that, we're missing something and we're trying to fill it with community?
A few angles. One, I think over many a year, and we could call it pandemic, we could call it digitalization, but all of the mechanisms in society that existed in terms of going to churches, going to social groups, that's changed over many a year. So our natural social interaction has declined, but the requirements, I listen to a lot of podcasts about happiness, and it's social interaction that drives happiness, contentment with our lives. So there is definitely a consciousness to our reckoning and right-sizing social interaction. But it often comes down really to, what are you looking out of it? What are you looking to gain from the community? And it's so multifaceted. You know, it could be have you tried this provider before, and share your technical experience with me. It could be I'm struggling with this type of conversation. Can we have a skills type of discussion? So I think there's so many reasons why community works. But for the pandemic specifically, I think we haven't really sized yet quite how big the impact is going to be. If I take the example of graduates, so I had the pleasure of setting up a graduate program at Very. The first year we recruited everybody remotely. And then the second year, we got panic attacks when we managed to go in person for the assessment centre, because that cohort hadn't been in a professional environment at all. They'd done their university remote, and they'd never been in a corporate workplace before, to the extent that showed in their physicality of having panic attacks. And I mean, I was stumped, absolutely stumped with that. So when I think I noticed it flash up in the chatter question on hybrid, and I just think we can't with one brush say that across everybody's requirements, we can come up with a policy within a people team that says, it looks like this for the whole organization. There's got to be the subcultures, the sub-teams within it, that we're really saying, for an individual, are we creating the environment that they're able to be their very best, and continue to take the feedback, adjust and go again. It's very complex out there.
Brilliant. I love that. And it's an insight into the changing world that we're trying to manage, and that we're not going to fix it all here. I think just to finish off on the community side, you're right in how you don't know where you're going to end up with the community as well. That's how we met, and here we are talking. Since our last meetup in London, we've set up a non-exec director group within the community. We've set up a future leaders group as well, because there were pockets of people who were sort of having that conversation. So it's great, and if it's well facilitated and it's led well, and I know it is by you and Billy in the oversight. So I think they're valuable things to do. I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm conscious of time, and we always sort of finish on these very sort of nice questions.
They will be nice, Chris, don't worry.
just to get under the skin a little bit, who is your hero? You talked about trying to get to the Olympics. There must be someone there, but who would you say your hero is? Because we're all about celebrating people.
I'm going a lot closer to home, and I wish he was listening so he'd get the credits, but I'm actually going for my husband, and that is not for the simple reason of being married and dealing with me, but he is the most purpose-led, high care and very driven individual that I know. And back to the earlier conversation where I said, I'm on a journey at the moment of trying to get work, family, care triangle to work. He's definitely further along that than me. So at the point that I'm failing or learning on one of the areas, I look to him, and he's much better at intervening at whichever one of those triangle points needs investment and needs work and needs consciousness. So he's definitely getting the hero spot for me, and long may that continue.
That's lovely. I'm sure he won't complain about that. And then finally, what sort of music inspires you? And the way I like to think about this is, if you were going up for that, acceptance speech for an award, what would be that music playing in the background?
I'll have to put some sort of layer over it before it gets played out loud. I'm certainly struggling with my kids at the moment with my music choices, but a good decade ago I ran the London Marathon, and for the hours pounding the pavement in training, it was rap that hit the spot for me, and it still works now. So headphones in, trainers on, and it's the rap playlist that I had a decade ago. So far too many profanities to be played on a stage, very inappropriate for my young child's ears. But yes, it hits the spot for me, and it helps me on that care dynamic of the triangle as well.
I love it. Well, you're not alone there. I'm a big fan. As I found out during the pandemic, was it Ramesh Ranganathan is a huge hip hop fan as well. He started a podcast on it. Anyway, I'll digress. I love that. I think it's great to sort of see a bit more of the personal side of leaders. So thank you for being so open today. I really appreciate it. Good luck with everything that you're doing. I will look out for the announcement. Is that days or weeks away, or?
TBC.
Okay, no problem. Well, all the best with it, and thanks very much for being part of today. I will just quickly show everybody the shift. So you will see on our website that there is all of this content and loads of great interviews, from John Lewis, Alcatel, Every, great interviews on there. They're all written. And this is the live version of that. So if you want to continue your reading around leaders, then please have a look there. But Selina, thanks again for today. Really appreciate that. And I'm just going to wrap up the session. So what we have going on the side of all this, which you may have seen already, is the group on the community, the platform that's online. So if you want to continue the conversation, please do there. You can connect with each other through the group for the summit, but as I said, there's lots of other groups on there, whether it's the Ned Shed, as we call it, or whether it's, you know, the future leaders or transformation stuff specifically, you can go onto there. It's primarily for, you know, business leaders and accounting and finance people. So that's the main thrust of it, but there are other pockets of people on there as well. And we have lots of stuff coming up in the next sort of few months. You know, Gen CFO is an all-round 365 community. So, you know, we will have something coming up every month, but this is what's coming up in the next few weeks. And if you were there for the 9 o'clock slot, you would have seen the announcement for the Digital Finance Function Awards for the partners and resources. We did the teams and leaders a couple of weeks ago. That's the sort of people side of things. But this morning was all about the technology and the partners and the consultancies and the resources that are out there, some of the personalities within the industry. So have a look at that. That was the 9 o'clock session if you're interested in the awards. And thanks for attending. I will see you on the next session, or I'll see you on the community platform. But thanks again. Thanks for joining, and see you very soon.